Every personality type has their dark side, but some are especially good at it. In this video, we're going to rank the different ways the 16 personality types manipulate people, and who just might be the best at it. So let's get into it. Let's get into it. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to go through how manipulation works for all of the 16 personality types and how they differ. Obviously, there's different types of manipulation. There's intellectual manipulation, emotional manipulation, and then there's the classic kind of definition of manipulation, which is to change people's actions to fit your desires, to fit the things that you want to have happen. So we're going to go through the types who are the best at this, who are the best at getting other people to do what they want them to do and how they do it. So it's going to be a subjective list. Leave a comment down below of who you think is the most manipulative and why, and whether that's because they try to be or because they're very good at it, and why those reasons are. So let's dive right into it. First, we're going to start with INFJs. INFJs in general aren't super manipulative. They have TI child. They try and be honest when they can. They try and just generally tell the truth. Now, when they get into some kind of trouble, they can be a little bit manipulative if they need to be, because they do have that any nemesis, which can kind of come out and manipulate. But in general, they're just going to be more closed off, more hidden. If pressed, they're going to tell the truth about things, but they might just leave things out. But when needed, they can be manipulative. Whoops. Here we go. All over the list here. But in general, I'm going to say they are C tier. I'm going to say nothing crazy for INFJs. They're not necessarily going to be a fast talker. They're not going to try and trick people. They're not going to try and get people to do exactly what they want. They give people some level of freedom. Now, they might be a little bit controlling, a little bit needy in certain ways in relationships, if you want to define those things, but that's not what the list is about. In general, when it comes to going out of their way to change other people's actions to fit what they want, they're not going to do it a ton. They're going to generally sit back, avoid conflict, see what's happening around them with their SE. They're going to have their own plans, their own desires that don't necessarily involve anyone. They might involve people, but they might not. And they're just going to kind of face reality, let what happens, respond in the moment, and try and generally be honest and have integrity. So I'm going to say, unless they're very much focused on that corrupt side of their mind, they're not going to be super manipulative. And very similar for ENFJs. I think this is a stereotype. ENFJs, yeah, that is a little unfair. A lot of people say, oh, they're guilt trippers, they're manipulators. ENFJs aren't FI personality types, and FI is compatible with FE, which is guilt. And FI users are the ones that guilt trip others. ENFJs are likely to be guilt tripped. The ENFJs are the ones to feel guilty. They're the ones that are easily manipulatable. I think that's a word. So ENFJs are someone who, personality type, who can suffer very easily from being manipulated, but they aren't necessarily going to manipulate others. Now, the reason they're not D tiers, they do have that intellectual ability to manipulate people's emotions, be passive aggressive, get people to do the things they want. They have that intelligence to manipulate, that potential, but they generally choose not to do it. And same with INFJs. They have the ability, but they often decide with integrity to not exercise that ability. So ENFJs generally try and do what's right for other people with that high FE, try and do responsible things, try and do the right thing. They're not going to try and manipulate people. They can if they need to, but they're not going to choose to very often. And in general, they're more the ones to be manipulated than to actually manipulate people. That's a bit of a stereotype misconception, in my opinion. With INFPs, I would say they have the complete opposite problem. INFPs are definitely a person who can be manipulated, but in general, they're very, very good at manipulating others, and they kind of do it from the background. They're an underrated manipulator. They often are able to control people's choices through their NE parent, which is very good at predicting things. They're kind of like an oracle. They can predict where things are going. They can use guilt if they need to. They're very good at emotional manipulation with that high feeling function. They're very good at being able to say things, explain things, make things up to get people to make the choices that benefit them in the end with that TENE combo. And as you'll see, that combo can be pretty great at manipulation because it can be thought controlling. It can look at what other people think with TE and change people's minds, which then changes their decision making with NE, which then gets them to do certain things which lead to outcomes that INFPs desire. And that high extroverted intuition is really the the whole entire definition of manipulation when it comes to manipulating people's choices to change how the world works. However, there are other types of manipulation we'll kind of get into with all the types, but INFPs can be very, very good at manipulating fates to go their way. And they can do it in a very subtle, discreet way. They're not always going to be loud in your face trying to, manipulate and change things right in the moment. They're going to be able to stay in the background and kind of do it subtly without people necessarily detecting it, which is the key kind of trait of a good manipulator, is that they won't be detected. And then we have ENFPs, and ENFPs are very good for all of the same reasons at manipulating other people. They have that extroverted intuition hero, which can see where things are going. They're very intelligent, very abstract. They're able to see what choices people might make and why, and how to change those so that they get specific things to happen that benefit them. They're also very active with that extroverted thinking, where they can make things up, when they can lie and deceive in order to get people to think and know certain things which benefit them. Again, that SI and FI combo is very focused on how things are affecting them and how things are benefiting them, and they can use that to then change the world around them to benefit them. So ENFPs can be very, very good at being manipulative. INTJs can be pretty manipulative in similar ways, but slightly less. INTJs have no extroverted intuition as their primary motivator. They're more focused on their goals, their desires, but they can manipulate to achieve those. They do have that high TE mastery, where they can change the way people think and use reputation and influence and power to manipulate people to do what they want. They can also be pretty power hungry with that NITE combo, and they can use that to then manipulate things, manipulate fates to go their way. They also have that low FE, that kind of integrity that stops the FJs from being as manipulative as they could be. So that can definitely be a problem in a social environment, in a relationship environment. And INTJs are very tactical, they're very intelligent, so they can manipulate people very well and very easily. They could even be one of the best manipulators, but they don't always do it because they are introverted types, and they're also extroverted sensing types. They live in the moment. They're not always looking 5 steps ahead with regards to what other people are going to do. They're more focused on themselves. They're more introverted in that way. And they can just focus on the moment. They might go up to someone and confront them if there's a problem, as opposed to manipulating this person to go talk to that person to make that person feel bad so that they do this. And then when they do that, that's going to screw them over. That's more of an NE type of manipulation. And so that holds them back from being that S tier. They're a little bit more realistic and in your face with what they're going to say and do. And same thing with ENTJs. ENTJs aren't necessarily going to be as manipulative when it comes to that type of thing, because they have that extroverted sensing in that optimistic slot, while ENTJs absolutely have the ability to be manipulative if they want. They have a very realistic perspective on things. If they have a problem with someone, they'll often confront them and be real in the moment and be honest. So they're not going to necessarily lie and deceive and go behind the scenes and do this and trick this person. They're just going to come right out and say it. They're going to be honest. They're going to speak their mind. They're going to express their opinions. They're going to express their feelings. They're going to get in your face if they need to. They're going to confront people, and they're just going to deal with things head on. They're not always going to go behind people's back and be super tricky and manipulative. That being said, they are very intelligent. They can still manipulate things, manipulate things towards their will, manipulate the way people think and view them and their perception in order to gain power and money and status and whatever they want. So they absolutely have the potential, the ability, but they're not always going to go there. They're not always going to want to be tricky. They're going to want to just deal with things right in the moment right now. We have INTPs. INTPs do have that extroverted intuition perspective, that ability to change the things people are doing and the way people are going and where they're going. But I wouldn't say they go up to that absolute S tier, because they do have that grounding in that TI. They like to be honest. They like to tell the truth. They're not always going to be tricky. They're not always going to be dishonest. And so that kind of desire to just be honest and say what's true does hold them back a little bit from being as manipulative as they could be. However, they absolutely have the potential with that high extroverted intuition to be able to get people to do what they want, to be able to change the way people think, to be able to change the way people feel. INTPs are very intelligent, and they do absolutely have that potential, but they won't always exercise it. They don't mind just being in the background and being in a more comfortable position. They still want other people to be happy, so they're not going to necessarily screw anyone over if possible. and they can feel pretty guilty as well. So they feel a bit more guilt when they manipulate than some of the other personality types that are higher up than them. And then we have ENTPs. ENTPs are another S tier manipulator. ENTPs are extremely good at manipulating people. They are extroverted intuition heroes, of course. So they have that ability to see where everything is going and how to get people to do certain things so that certain things happen. And they also are very intelligent and tactical. So they have that ability with that INTJ shadow to be strategic and to pave their own path and pave what they're going to do to get things to go their way. And using that kind of TI parent to be deductive as well makes them potentially the best at manipulation. Their FE child, that desire to make a positive impact on other people, can sometimes hold them back, but they are extremely good manipulators. If you want to see this in action, watch Kenny versus Spenny and watch Kenny Hots and just see it. And that's a great example. Yeah, very good at manipulating people, can be very good at lying. They have that TI that compels them to be honest when they kind of take off the mask, but they can absolutely lie their way through things if they need to. And then we have ISFJs. ISFJs can be manipulative, but I would say ISFJs are a bit more concrete about it. They do have that TI child, and if pressed, they're going to be honest. If pressed, and pressured, they're going to kind of say the truth. They're not necessarily going to, do a crazy amount of work to manipulate people. They're going to stay in the background, and they can be a little manipulative from the background, get things to go their way, of course, like any normal person does. And if they need to, they can, but they're often going to feel guilty. They're often going to feel bad about themselves. They're not always going to be proactively manipulating or strategically manipulating actively. They're going to take a background approach. They're going to kind of do their thing. They're going to be relatively honest, and they're not always going to be actively, proactively looking to change the way things are. However, they could if they wanted to, and like every personality type on this list, can be very manipulative if they need to be, but whether or not they're proactively doing this daily is a different question. And we have ESFJs, and I would say very similar things, although I would say ESFJs go a little bit of a tier up because they can be pretty manipulative. I would even say potentially up to the B tier, because ESFJs are quite proactive with those functions being extroverted. That FE and NE being extroverted makes all the difference here. Where, yes, they might be honest here and there, but they're going to be proactively looking to change the future, to change what people want. They're going to be willing to use their FE as a little bit more of a weapon socially, whether that's being dramatic, whether that's making up rumors about people, or whether that's just manipulating people socially to like them so that they can gain favor. ESFJs are definitely much more willing, and with that SI mediating, they can be manipulative if they want. However, what holds them back from those top tiers is a lot of ESFJs will still try and be rooted in that goodness and that integrity to make other people's lives better and be a good person and try and be honest. So ESFJs, while they can be manipulative, they also cannot. And then we have ISTJs. ISTJs, I would say, ISTJs aren't always going to be proactively manipulative as well. ISTJs can be pretty manipulative if they need to be. They still have that ability to change the way people think, change what people are doing, but they're more concrete. They're more living in the moment. They're more just getting by, doing their thing, trying to follow the rules, trying to do the right thing, and just live their life, live in the moment, just kind of get by. They're not always going to be proactively changing outcomes, changing the way things are. While they can be a little tricky here and there, they're going to be more concrete, just straight to the point, honest. They're not always going to enjoy lying all that much, and they are going to have some level of, complacency with the way things are. They're not always going to have as much of that drive that might motivate them to change the way things are and change the future and manipulate people. So I would say that holds them down. ESTJs are very similar things, although I would say ESTJs are a little bit better at manipulating because they are extroverted personality type with that optimistic extroverted intuition, which, unlike an ISTJ, leads them to be a little bit more proactive with their manipulation. Their T is optimistic, so they're more proactive with trying to get people to think certain things about them and gain power and status. And their NE is more optimistic, and as we talked about that, willing to change how people do things, willing to change what people want without them necessarily knowing. Very manipulative and without necessarily getting in your face like an extroverted sensing user and telling you what to do, but then trying to kind of subversively get you to do it without you knowing. And ISFPs, I would say, While they don't have that extroverted intuition, they are a little bit more manipulative than people think, and they're a little bit like INTJs in that way, where they do have that TESE combo. And while that SE is a little bit more authentic, realistic, will get in your face and say the truth, their extroverted thinking and that foresight, that insecurity, can make them a bit manipulative. They are willing to make things up and lie if they need to, if they feel like their reputation is in harm, or that it might become a problem, or they might get in trouble. And so ISFPs can be a little bit more manipulative in those specific circumstances where they just don't care as much about, being honest or sharing about their past, and they can kind of manipulate. They're also very good at emotional manipulation and guilt tripping with that high FI understanding and using their feelings as a weapon to make others feel bad for them. Same for ESFPs, exact same explanation I just gave. The ability to, yes, sure, they pressure and they can get people to do things that they want with that high extroverted sensing, and that's kind of an SE form of manipulation to get people to do what they want them to do. But they can also be very, very good emotional manipulators because they have high emotional intelligence, and they can utilize this to gain favor with other people emotionally, kind of the same way ESFJs do. Then we have ISTPs. ISTPs are an interesting one because they're not necessarily going to be all that manipulative too proactively. They don't mind kind of chilling, just doing their own thing. They're going to want the things they want. They're not always going to be thinking 10 steps ahead, trying to manipulate people, trying to get people to believe lies and to get them to do this so that it benefits them. They're not too focused on themselves in that way. They're more focused on doing what they want to do with their life and doing smart things and doing honest things and doing things for others. They're not going to spend that much time manipulating people. And I would say that that kind of goes for ESTPs as well, although ESTPs maybe have a little bit more of that manipulative streak with that extroverted perspective, where they're a little bit more proactively interacting with other people. So they have a little bit more of that ability to manipulate how people feel and manipulate the experiences of others to gain favor as well, and utilize that extroverted power as a bit more of a weapon. But they're often going to hold themselves back from being the most manipulative with some level of ethical integrity that keeps them from truly changing people's fate all too much. So I hope this explains kind of a general overview. I know the definition can be a difficult one to nail down. It can be a little vague. Even manipulative itself can be a difficult one, but I hope I explained well enough to get you to kind of understand my reasoning for these types, and at the very least learned a little bit about how these types manipulate and why. If you enjoyed, please like and subscribe as it helps the channel, and I hope you all have a great day.